Public Q&A presents AskReddit question. What was the best you have no power here moment you have ever seen? I worked in management at a theater for a while. If the concession counter was slammed and I was able, I'd leave my post and help them sling popcorn. One night while helping out, a particularly belligerent man started cussing out a 16-year-old girl on a cash register for being too slow, even suggesting she quit since she clearly couldn't handle pushing buttons or scooping popcorn. It was pretty disgusting and I felt so bad for the girl. I stepped in and told the guy that our employees have the right to refuse service to customers who harass them as part of our anti-harassment or discrimination policy, empathized that the lines were longer than usual, and suggested he should apologize and move on. He was pissed. Left half his order on the counter and started fuming off. Anticipating his next move, I went back to my original post that night as manager of the customer service kiosk. Oh boy, the look on his face when he saw me. Didn't want a refund of his tickets though, so I assume he watched the movie without popcorn. Good on you. I hate those abusive fucks. Always finding some young, sweet person to abuse. The guy that I would gone on a few dates with introduced me to his parents. Things went well, or so I thought. He drives me home, we end up talking and drinking a few beers. I didn't want him on the road with any alcohol in his system, and I enjoyed his company, so we end up hanging out until 3 a.m. His mom starts blowing up his phone, demanding that he comes home, so he drives himself home to find that he's been locked out of his house. His mom said that he can sleep outside. He shouldn't be spending time with someone like me. Still don't know what she meant by that, and that I am just another stop on the pussy train. He tells her not to talk about me like that, to which she says, when you're under my roof, I'll say whatever I want about whoever I want. So he picks up his phone, calls me, asks if he can stay at my place for a little while. It's been 7 years, we're engaged, have a dog, a cat, and a happy life. I also plan on throwing some subtle train themes into the wedding or celebration after the end of the plague. In your vows say something like, I am glad I am the last stop on the pussy train for you. Don't forget in your thank you speech to include your mill without your words of support and wisdom. I wouldn't be married to your son and riding the train of happiness today, or something better. This is a bit silly, but gave me a great feeling of satisfaction. Due to the bad economy and poor money management, my parents have moved into the spare room of the house my husband and I bought a year ago. Things are mostly smooth, though I am not the closest to them for several reasons I won't go into here. The other evening I was out gardening because it's hot during the day, and we have the luck of having a street light right next to our front yard, keeping it pretty well illuminated even after sundown. I mostly garden at night, and I thought I had gotten the hose twisted, as it kept getting stuck. This went on for a bit, when I realized that it wasn't stuck but being pulled. I looked into the dim area just past the illumination of the street light and spied my father, crouched over and tugging the hose. Well, I did the only reasonable thing to do, and I sprayed him. He yelled and ran inside with me chasing. Once he got inside he made a face, and goes, "You can't get me now." I am inside. In that father to daughter don't you make a mess tone of voice. I readied my hose, looked him in the eye and said, "It's my house." And just fucking let loose with the hose. He was soaked. Worth cleaning up the mess for that moment of true fear in his eyes. Edit. Thanks for all the appreciation. I am glad my silly story made your day better. This is the most wholesome shit I have ever heard in my life. This was great. Some secretary of some branch of a state agency would go on a power trip and stamp, "Do not copy" on things that she sent to local agencies. Well, I work for an oversight agency, and I needed a copy. Locals were terrified, so I rolled my eyes and called to explain that the locals and I were basically the same entity. Woman started to have a conniption fit, but she got real quiet when I cut her off and said, "Fine, I'll issue a subpoena. What's your name and job title?" She answered, and the sheriff served her a subpoena for what I wanted. Guess she wasn't used to that. When I was in high school, I worked at popular warehouse clubs selling computers on the weekends. I was hired by the store manager via referral of a friend. I loved computers and they thought I would make a good salesman, so my job was to stay in the computer department and sell computers, nothing else. Well, one of the shift managers didn't like that, and insisted that I needed to go fold clothes for a while. As in, half my damn shift. I told him that the store manager had instructed me never to leave the technology department, but he insisted. This went on for several weeks. The store manager showed up one weekend when both the power trip and shift manager and I were working. The store manager walks up with the shift manager close behind. Store manager slaps a stack of green bar paper, this was a while ago, down onto a shelf and points to some highlighted numbers. He looks at the shift manager and says, "Do you see this? This is our average technology sales numbers for the weeks you are on shift. See this number over here? This is our average technology sales numbers for weeks you are not. At this point, it would be more cost-effective for me to simply fire you. What do you think of that solution?" The guy stammers and stutters like a toddler caught bullying another kid on the playground. Fortunately, the dude wasn't fired, but the store manager made it clear that when I was on shift, I was not to leave the technology department unless I was on break or there was a fire in the store. That shift manager never said another word to me. The best jobs are when management has your back. Knowing this and the value of what you bring to the table is the best thing that manager could have ever done. I hope you kept this as a reference for future jobs. I worked for 8 years servicing communications equipment on site. 5 of those years were as the department manager. When oil was found in our area, we got so busy we could barely even think. Most of my team were pulling 12-plus hour days 6 days a week, and we were struggling to hire people quick enough. One day, the CEO texted and said he hired an assistant manager for me, which was something I desperately needed. I was dirty as hell from my previous job and swung by the store to pick him up and take him to one of our sites, where he would be doing paperwork. The moment he got in the truck, he immediately started talking shit. He started telling me about how everything we were doing is fucked up and the department manager, my name, was a total moron, and he would have my job within a few months. I just sat and mostly listened. He obviously didn't know shit about my industry, and every time he would say something wrong, I would try to politely correct him, and he'd either backtrack or insist that I was trained wrong. When we got to the site out in the middle of the West Texas desert, he complained about the layer of dust on everything and ordered me to clean up the entire site. When I sat down at my desk, the guy continued to bitch my ear off about everything that was wrong and chastised me for sitting down at my desk when he told me to clean up the site. So I called for a taxi, filled out a notice of termination, and handed it to him. He looked absolutely shocked. Then he defiantly protested that only CEO could fire him. I said, "In my name, right?" He sheepishly nodded. So I stuck my hand out for a handshake and introduced myself. I can teach anyone how to service equipment, but I don't have a clue how to teach someone to not be an asshole. I had a boss whose one hiring philosophy was, we can teach people work skills, but we can't teach them what their parents should have taught them. Been a guiding principle for me when hiring ever since. I wonder what that asshat is doing now. I hope for his sake he learns some humility, but you really never know. I saw him a few years ago managing a Firestone. I didn't stop to say hi. As my previous foreman would say, I can fix dumb, but I can't fix stupid. That would be a customer we had named Nick. I'll leave his last name out to protect the stupid. He would email us and always CC editor at some national newspaper. And most of his emails were things like "nothing fucking works." None of the national newspapers responded. I imagine some underling just rolled his eyes and deleted them. Finally he said, "Fix this in 5 minutes or I cancel." My manager says, "Let me see that email." He responded, "Thank you, I canceled your account. We don't want customers like you anyway. If you want to contact the media, that's your call, I'll happily provide the months of threatening emails you sent to my staff. He gave us months of headaches over a £45 or quarter account. We definitely didn't need him. Obligatory not mine, but this video belongs in this thread. This is the best you don't have power here move I have ever seen lol. She was working for government, has problems sitting with baby on plane, tried to eat the job of air hostess then Uno reverse card lol. Funny the 180 she flips on the flight attendants. I want this woman off my plane. I am sorry. I am just really stressed out. Some people super suck. Right? Like they'll say whatever they think is most effective in the moment to get their way regardless. Being dick doesn't work for me anymore. OMG, I am so sorry now. Always start with being nice. There's literally no downside FFS. I knew exactly what this was before clicking the link. I love how quickly her attitude changed when the flight attendant says get her off my plane and shows no mercy. Even better, the bitch lost her job after trying to pull that card to get her way. As someone who used to work in the service industry myself, this is always a satisfying moment to see. I used to be a flight attendant. Passengers would get super shitty with us if there was even a tiny delay or issue, and accuse us of causing delays so that we could get paid more. Most dumbass passengers don't realize that the flight crew don't get paid until the main cabin door is closed. That's what starts our time clock for getting paid. Oftentimes passengers had no problem berating a tiny young soft-spoken flight attendant, but what they don't realize is that the pilots don't put up with that shit. Almost all the pilots I worked for at the regional airline were awesome. They backed up their flight attendants unwaveringly. It was hilarious to see the look on the PAX's face when the captain came out if on the ground and told the PAX to GTFO. I got out of it after a few years because it was just too frustrating, the treatment was awful, and the hours were terrible. I got out of it after a few years because it was just too frustrating, the treatment was awful, and the hours were terrible. When an unhappy client threatens to go hire a better lawyer, they don't seem to get that this isn't a threat when they aren't paying me. In my professional experience, it is exceedingly rare to be fired by a client you don't want to fire you. I have worked at a law firm for only a few months, but yeah. Every time a client has fired us like 3 times, everyone at the office is like, oh thank God. IT services for a client of mine. They paid for me to come to their office and address a problem. 8 hours minimum time. The issue was resolved in about 45 minutes, they'd set up something incorrectly, and it was pretty obvious once I got into the system. I was packing up to leave and the client stopped me. What are you doing? The system is fixed, so I am headed out back to my office. No, I paid for 8 hours, you'll do your 8 hours. If I tell you to wash my car for 8 hours, that's what you'll be doing. Right. So anyway, I am leaving. I'll notify the office to send you the invoice, and in all likelihood we'll no longer be working with you, and withdrawing your lease on our equipment. And then what happened? This is a good one. I need to hear what happened afterwards. A client once paid for me to fly to New York and spend 2 nights in a nice Manhattan hotel to add a semicolon to a config file. I worked at a grocery store for 5 years, putting up with crazy customers and their awful attitudes. At the end of my tenure, our store was set to be closed, and for the last month the store was sold to a liquidation company. Meaning we were no longer under our parent company's umbrella, and were no longer concerned with retaining customer loyalty. I got to tell customers no and respond with every bit of sarcasm and disdain to every Karen I encountered for 1 month until the store officially closed. Geez, did you just skip to work every day for that last month? I would love to just hang out in the store and witness the deserved sass. Customer service is rough. That last month was the most relaxed month in retail I ever had. I would only finished college and was finally comprehending a world where I could relax after hours, we were allowed to go in casual as long as we wore our work smock, and just about all of our standards went out the window. When I was covering the customer service desk, I was even making sandwiches for lunch in full view of the customers while I was tending to them. My personal favorite was when someone in their 50s complained about how we were no longer honoring the flyer for something in sale, detergent I think. Anyway, he's going on this tirade about how he'll just go to another store, and he wanted to talk to a manager. I just told him we weren't with the company anymore, and it didn't matter if he talked to a manager because he still wasn't getting anything extra from us. The safety was off. Man, living the dream. It should always be like that. Treat workers the way you want to be treated. I started working for a welding company as an engineering manager. We were selling an extremely complex weldment pressure tank that goes under the shitter for $9K, out costs were $3K. The owner took the bid to get in with this big company. The owner legit said we'll make it up in volume. We weren't. Anyway, the buyer for the larger company was a huge bitch, and would regularly yell on phone calls. We sent them a letter that we would honor the last 5 tanks on the current PO at the same price. I didn't even want to do that, but after that they were going up to $10K per. She drove down with her boss the next day, and demanded an explanation, and threatened to pull the business. I replied that we were losing $5K per tank, and couldn't do it anymore. She demanded evidence, which I already had pulled up, and simply turned on the projector. I said, as you can see, we cannot continue to make this part at such a huge loss, and I don't think anyone can make it for the original price, so if you have to pull the business, we understand. Her boss tripped over himself, cutting her off, and said they weren't pulling out, and actually thanked us for honoring the current PO. I didn't have many run-ins with her after that. Know your costs and never be afraid to fire a customer. I have many times. Most all come back. Let them save face, and very often they become actual good customers. This is so important. In my younger years, I took any job for any client. After a few years, I was large enough to hire a salesperson. The first thing he did was to show which clients were profitable. It turned out that all of our PIA tax clients were not profitable. I was losing money due to additional service calls or additions. They would refuse to pay for the change order. I thought I was providing good customer service. Turns out, I was a sucker. 3 to 4 months after my salesperson was hired, I fired almost all of those clients, and more than doubled company profits, and lost my 80-hour weeks. A few years ago, a guy stopped me in the hardware store, and asked if I was a painter. I looked down at my painter's whites and said, "Yeah, I do historical restoration work." He asked how much I charge per hour, and when I told him, he immediately told me I was too expensive and dropped my rate by 25%. I had already given him my number, but he kept belittling me and saying I wasn't worth it. I just told him that I already had a full-time job, and this would be in my off hours, so it needed to be worth my while. He finally let me leave the store, then called me 3 or 4 times, each time hemming and hawing over if he wanted to actually use me or not. He's got a bunch of properties, it would be a sweet gig, but not at those prices. And I just kept telling him that's fine, don't use me if you don't want to. Eventually I recognized his number and stopped picking up. He really thought he had some sort of power over me, and I would jump at the opportunity. Luckily I didn't have to take the work, I was making good enough money as it was. He would have nitpicked absolutely everything, and probably not paid me at the end anyway. But he was so certain he'd have power in the situation, that he didn't seem able to comprehend me not wanting to barter with him. I worked at a movie theater, and some customers were adamant that a staff member had stolen their wallet after they dropped it. Turns out that these people just couldn't see, and found the wallet once they actually looked for it. They got irate with literally everyone, from the mall security to the managers to the staff. Mall security finally said, "Get the fuck out," and the customers went, "You can't say that. This isn't your theater, we're customers." Mall security guy promptly said this is my mall, and I can do whatever the fuck I want. I joined the Army Reserve in 1983, in between my junior and senior year in high school. Going to drill one weekend, and we were doing war games with another reserve unit. They mailed everyone a letter with the challenge and response to be let into the unit. As a lowly private, I was standing guard at the entrance and had to say the challenge. Everything's going good until a city police car pulls up and the cop is a new lieutenant. I give the challenge and he just look at me. I say it again and he said to just let him in because he didn't know it. He starts getting belligerent and I ask him to turn off the car and step out. He gets out and starts yelling at me. The sergeant major heard the commotion and comes over and tears the young lieutenant a new asshole. It was very satisfying to watch, and I learned that day that even though a second lieutenant outranks a sergeant major, it really doesn't matter because the sergeant major had been in for 20 years and didn't put up with any bullshit. The best description of how a sergeant major chain of command works. From another sub. There's two kinds of authority in the military. Rank and position. In regards to rank, an LT outranks a SGM. However, in regards to position, a SGM is likely at least 2 or 3 echelons above the LT, and can easily make that LT's life a shit-waiting simulator. When I was an ensign, I outranked my chief. I never contradicted him, always listened to him, and let him handle the guys unless he asked otherwise. I had a good chief though. Ended up getting some chiefs who were, well, not as good later in my time as an officer, but there would always be another chief or a strong first class I could lean on for senior enlisted support, and the chiefs that were lazy didn't care that I went around them. When I was working customer service for a restaurant delivery service, not unlike DoorDash, I had a customer send in a complaint about hair in their food. The hair was sitting on top of the food. I checked their account, and they had one order on their account, which is a red flag. I checked their phone number and find multiple accounts, each other 1 to 2 orders, all of them complaining about hair in the food. I deny a refund because the customer has actually used the same identical photo for the last order since they ordered the same thing. The customer tries to argue with me, threatened to never use the service again, typical stuff that they always say. Eventually the customer gives up and ends the call, then immediately tries again. I get the support request. See who it is, then deny the refund again. She ends the call, then tries again. The person behind me gets the call. I tap the person on the shoulder and show them what I pulled up on my screen, and that person denies the refund. The next day she calls back and tries again, and is outside of the refund window, so the customer demands to speak to a supervisor. The supervisor bans her from the service for multiple fraudulent refund requests. The customer tries to argue with me, threatened to never use the service again. So we agree, great. I have managed service industry for years, and the number of people who make that threat having never spent a penny is baffling, especially this year. I swear it's once a week right now that after I tell somebody to leave, and not return, they've threatened not to return. I have had to have police remove people, and they'll scream about how they'll never return on their way out. Are the police dragging you out not enough of a sign that that's exactly what I want? What about the criminal trespassing notice you got? Some people just cannot fathom that they're not wanted everywhere by everyone. Some dudes would walk in for the first time, and loudly declare, I am finally here. Like they just got back from liberating France, and it was just a big OL red flag that declared, I will demand special treatment the entire time I am here. I wasn't good at returning library books when I was a kid. I got lectured by my school librarian about it a lot. Fast forward 20 years, and I am a supervisor at the local public library, and my former now retired school librarian goes there. One day I see her sneaking around the front desk instead of coming back to say hi to me, and I immediately figure something's up. I go up to say hi, and she acts exasperated and tells me she was trying to avoid me because she had overdue books. So I put on my reading glasses, pulled them down over my nose, and delivered the same lecture she'd given me countless times about being responsible and turning in books on time. Your training is now complete. My dad is 6'3". I am 6'10". Sometime in my early teens, I shot past him. Dad was a yeller. Not doing what he thought I should be. No discussion, just yell. But I realized at some point that he wouldn't yell at me if he had to look up while he was doing it. I don't remember what our last argument was about, I just remember that I would sort of caught on at this point. So I am in my room in front of the computer, Dad comes in and starts yelling at me. I eventually stand up and start yelling back. Dad makes an excuse to leave. Dad comes back about a half hour later and starts yelling again, but at this point, it's all I can do to not just laugh. I know that the instant I stand up, the argument will end. It actually wound up being really good for our relationship, because Dad realized that he actually had to make valid points, rather than just going into former drill sergeant mode. Edit. Obligatory this blew up etc. etc. It looks like I unintentionally may have hit a raw nerve for a lot of people, for which I apologize. And I don't think that I had it anywhere near as bad as some of the people who replied. All I can say is that if you find yourself in a situation where you've got parents whose first response is intimidation or worse, look at how most people who responded eventually got out of the situation. Hang in there, it gets better, and you can find people who will help you if that's what is necessary. I was working as a consultant for a company. There was a bit of a competition between me and this guy. Company starts to have some financial issues, so I leave and start working for a client of theirs. Shortly after joining, they bring in this guy I was competing with at my old job. He was technically my equal, except now I was employed by the client, and he was just a consultant. He was trying to one-up me during meetings, and my boss told him that decisions are made by the company, not the consultants. It felt good. I have kind of a similar one. I worked for Company A for 6 years before I decided to try something new. When I worked at Company B, I did some very specific things in a very specific field. Company A was having some issues with that topic and gave me a great offer to come back. My second day back, we had a meeting about that topic. My VP said I would take lead on it. A director tried to pull rank, got all pissy, and said his team would handle it, and that they didn't need help from my VP or his team. Our CFO stopped him, said Sardines was taking lead, and that if I needed help I was free to reach out to his team. I would have felt a little bad, since apparently he didn't know this was the main reason I was brought on, but he was a total asshat, so fuck him. Reminds me of the "I am the client now" line from Mad Men. Probably watching a few Texas DPS officers realize they couldn't shut down a whole airport. I was working as a flight instructor at small airport on a Saturday afternoon. We had one plane that had an issue on takeoff and veered off the runway. It cartwheeled and totaled the airplane, but fortunately the pilot was not seriously injured. I had a student who was next in line for takeoff when it happened. He called me from his phone as it happened. I hopped in the airport car with one of the rampers and drove out to the plane with a radio to inform inbound planes to use the other runway. We had no control tower. On the way to the runway, I called the airport manager, who drove to the airport, and on his way he made a phone call to officially close that runway. About 30 minutes later, a metric fuckton of DPS officers showed up and immediately tried to close the whole airport, treating it like a giant crime scene. They were carelessly driving around the airport like they owned the place, ignoring the planes that were moving around, and crossing our only open runway without regard to inbound traffic. A mechanic and I tried to tell them to be careful, and they got mad at us. One of them told me they were locking it down a couple times, meaning the whole airport. Now I was a broke-ass flight instructor, and I had a flight that afternoon that was ultimately going to help pay for me to eat that week. The airport manager was a short, stereotypical country guy, also former Navy. He was not intimidated at all by the cops trying to close his airport. When he showed up, I was about to go out with a student who was pre-flighting for a cross-country. There were about 5 cops in the lobby, me with my flight bag, the airport manager, and a mechanic. One of the cops saw my flight bag and said, "I don't know why you have that or why he's out of the plane. You aren't going anywhere." The moment he finished his sentence, the airport manager said, "It's one runway that's closed, the airport is still open." This pissed off the cops. I was about to head out the door, and one of the officers said he was driving out to the disabled plane. Idki, the pilot, had been gone for about an hour. The mechanic said, "You need to be careful," and the cop quickly retorted, "And why the hell I asked that?" And he said, "Because this is still an airport, and the first thing that hits you is going to be a propeller." A few seconds later, a plane took off as one of the cars was approaching the runway intersection, ironing in that point. I walked out, and as I was hopping in the plane with my student, the same cop came up to me and said, "You aren't going anywhere, we're locking this down." I looked at the airport manager, who followed all of us out to the ramp. He said, "Have a nice flight, Ajaxview." You could see these cops just fuming that they didn't have the authority to close down an entire airport because one plane went off the runway. The airport had 2 runways. Where the disabled plane was located was probably a mile or so away from the open runway. Why they were making a big fuss, I don't know. The occupant was relatively uninjured. His wife was the worst thing he had to deal with that day. He told her he wasn't going to fly. We had a good flight, and I got to eat dinner that week. It just get buried at this point, but your story reminds me of one I had at work. I worked at the flight service station in Yellowknife, Canada. There we have a control tower, and FSS tower had the radios at that time of day. Pilot reports smoke in the cockpit, declares an emergency. He was 20 minutes out, and there's nowhere else to land, so he just continuing to come here. In the interim, emergency procedures put in place, airport firefighters are out in force. EMS is on standby, the town fire hall comes out. And out comes Captain Jackass from the cops, banging on my door. "Hi, I am here to take control." "Of what?" "The situation, I am in command." "Okay, well, tower has the radios right now, so they are the ones dealing with the emergency." "Then I am going upstairs to take control." "Alrighty, you do that." He starts to head up the additional floors to the control tower. Thing is, tower's door, like mine, is locked and can only be opened with our keys or from the inside. I call upstairs and relay there's a cop coming to take control. Naturally, they do not let him in. There's really nothing he could possibly do except make noise and be in the way. Not long after, he stomps back down, and I hear him radio some nonsense about who do they think they are. I am in command. That's hilarious. I wonder if he ever realized that people who are in command aren't the ones behind locked doors while trying to convince others that they are in command. New CEO came to our department on the first day of his work. He didn't have a pass card yet, and a lower-level employee told him that he can't enter without pass card. CEO got upset and ordered a worker to let him in, but the worker insisted. "Show me the pass card, or you're not entering." Few days later, this worker got a bonus. Did said CEO grant the bonus? Sorry if that's a stupid question. Yes. At the beginning he was very upset and told the worker he will be fired, but later when he found out that there are explosives in this department and entrance rules are very strict, he granted the bonus. Sometime in the late 80s I worked at a Walmart warehouse. There was a strict rule. If you didn't have your security badge you could not get in the front door. One day just behind me an older fellow gets stopped by LP for no badge. One of my friends pokes me and points out that the LP guy just refused to let Sam Walton in the door. We all stopped to watch what we assumed was going to be a shit show. To his credit, Mr. Walton stops and goes back to his vehicle and gets his badge, and he thanked the LP guy for following the rules. Geez, I did a stint at Walmart. It was one of the older stores, as we're not too far from Arkansas, where they started. Several of my coworkers met the guy, and apparently the way the stores were run before he passed away, and after he passed, are two different animals. From what I have read, Sam Walton's business model was the following. Sell domestic goods at foreign-made prices, do so profitably by reducing turnover and economy of scale. Treat your workers extremely well both to keep them, and to provide exemplary customer service. Does sound like a very different beast. That's like the opposite of Walmart now. Like almost every store that starts out good, the founder dies and they're spoiled, greedy children take over and destroy their parents' vision in order to make even more money. His children have a very different mindset than he did, too. He made a lot of money, but he didn't really separate himself from the common folk. He dressed in the same clothes most of the time, and drove the 79 F-150 that still gets pulled out and driven in parades in the area. It used to be a pleasant job that a lot of women really wanted. It gave them something to do when it was normal to just be a housewife. They had a tight-knit community, and they'd often bake for each other and bring it into work. The first Walmarts were really amazing. I was waiting for a friend to finish work. She worked at a restaurant so fancy, they had someone vetting guests at a podium outside. The place was glitzy and the folks were glam, so the great and good would descend in droves. Those with a reservation were sent in, prospective walk-ins had to queue. A car sweeps up, the driver jumps out and holds the door open to unleash a hat and dress. The woman accompanying said finery, a C-list actress from a regional daytime TV show, looked through everyone present and moved to enter. She froze, appalled, when the guest vetter intercepted, asking, "Do you have a reservation?" She mustn't have heard the question because she didn't respond. Instead, she drew herself up to the full height of her couture and demanded, "Do you know who I am?" "Yes," said the maitre d', back of the queue. Oof. I personally had one that I am quite proud of. I was one of 2 mechanics responsible for an annual inspection on a Piper Aero fixed-wing prop aircraft. Aside from dismal compression ratios and some odds and ends in the aircraft that could be overlooked by technicality, there was a problem with the main landing gear motor. The down and lock cycle for that aircraft is required by the OEM, and by extension federal law, to be 30 seconds or less across one cycle of the motor. This plane's gear requires 3 to 5 cycles across about 2 minutes to achieve down lock. I told the owner, who was a famously sleazy lar, that he can't fly his plane, and I won't sign off the annual until the main landing gear are fixed. The lar told me to sign off the annual, and he'll get to fixing the gear some other time. When I said no, he proceeded to threaten my job and demanded to have the plane back, so he could get another mechanic to sign it off as airworthy. I laughed in his face and pounded his aircraft and notified the FAA. The man eventually gave his aircraft to my business I was working for at the time, by way of title lien, in order to pay off the massive hangar fees he racked up from his plane sitting in my shop. Aside from dismal compression ratios and some odds and ends in the aircraft that could be overlooked by technicality, there was a problem with the main landing gear motor. The down and lock cycle for that aircraft is required by the OEM, and by extension federal law, to be 30 seconds or less across one cycle of the motor. This plane's gear requires 3 to 5 cycles across about 2 minutes to achieve down lock. It's kind of cool how my brain can read a whole paragraph and not understand any of it. When my manager at McDonald's gets into bitch fights with all the aggressive or toxic customers and booting them out the store by calling the mall security if they refuse to leave. Actually sounds like a good manager. I unfortunately had a shit manager whose redeeming quality was being a bouncer as a second job. It was like watching a brick wall plow through a room when he was throwing someone out. My job right before my current one. Property manager, the owner, was an absolute prick. He was heartless and rude and racist, and I loathed him. I hated every day going into that job, but I needed the money. I was applying daily to my dream company in hopes that eventually I'd be accepted. In the meantime, every time I complained or mentioned something to my supervisor, I was told to shut up and get on with it. He was paying me too much to have opinions. 3 years after, we were a small office, and the receptionist and assistant prop managers had quit. I finally got accepted into my dream company, and happily put in my 2-week notice. In desperation, he offered me more money, a higher position, better benefits which were laughable. When I said no, he asked why. I have never felt more gleeful than the moment of when I said I don't know. I am not paid to have opinions here. That was a year ago, and even now the look on his stupid old face gives me joy to this day. Edit. Typo and obligatory. Didn't expect this to blow up, but yeah. I am petty. What is new? LOL. Thanks for the awards. To those who mentioned. This was a very brief summarized version, and yes, he did remember saying it to me. He told me I was being too sensitive, and should take more money. I have kept in touch with my awesome supervisor, and in the year since I have left, the position has yet to be filled. Everyone keeps quitting because they can't work with someone like him. So, bahaha. Edit 2. Also, since a few people asked the new job a yearish in is doing great, and still to this day almost cry at the thought that I have benefits that include health insurance, and a boss that doesn't call me sweetie in a tone that indicates I can't chew gum and walk at the same time. I was bartending one night, and these 3 guys were absolutely hammered, so I cut them off. One of the guys proceeded to try to argue with me, saying he has all this money, and he tells me when he's done drinking, and he's not even drunk. At this point, I am done trying to be polite and point blank tell him I am done arguing with him, will not be serving him and his buddies, and he can leave. He looks at me and says, "Now excuse me, who are you to tell me how much I can and cannot drink?" I look him dead in the eye and say, "The fucking bartender, now it's time for you to go." The look on his face was priceless. Never forget the golden rule, don't piss off your bartender. Woman complained we wouldn't fill her clearly fraudulent C2 prescription, brought the brand new store manager back to the pharmacy to make us fill it. She says you have to fill it. God himself cannot make us fill anything if it fails the checks. No. Worked in a cell phone store, both selling devices and service contracts in the UK. Some kid 19ish maybe came in with a much shorter man, who I later learned was his dad for whatever reason, I forget what now. He wanted to cancel out of a contract he was partway through. Now I could already tell from the way the kid explained it in exasperated terms that he knew he couldn't cancel out of it, but his dad wasn't taking his word for it, and had dragged him in to try and sort it out for him. The contracts clearly state you can't cancel prematurely without paying off the rest of your dues, which I explained, and his father just went full boomer rage mode on me. Spitting, frothing, hurling vitriol. This guy clearly thought this was how you got things done. I stared him down, waited for him to finish, and repeated the contractual terms as stated. He hit me back with, "I'll report you for violating the Sale of Goods Act." Sucks to be him because I had that bitch memorized. I made a point of it, in fact. After the first few customers in my early days tried to bring it up to get their own way, some chode on the internet had made posts about how you could sling the term around and usually scare retailers into doing what you want because they don't know it either, so it happened a lot even when there was absolutely no call for it. I just looked at him and said, "Sure. Go ahead. You can even use our phone." And pointed at the store phone right next to him. I knew he didn't have a leg to stand on, and any trade commissioner listening to his claim would laugh him off the line. He clearly had absolutely no idea how to proceed. After a moment of blank staring, he just turned and stormed out with his son rolling his eyes so far back into his head he could probably see his own brain in embarrassment at his dad's tantrum. When I was still a child, I saw how abusive my grandparents were to my parents when they used to stay in their house during their early years of marriage when they were broke. They are forced to accept the abuse and swallow their pride, knowing that they're still indebted to them and had nowhere to go. Once they have enough money to leave my grandparents, they moved to a small rented house. My grandparents came for an unannounced visit and berate my dad for living in such a shanty house, and how ungrateful he was for leaving their home. My dad was silent until they start blaming my mother for being a wife that brought bad luck to my dad, and how she poisons him into moving to a new home. My dad weren't having any of their bile anymore and kicked them out. They stopped talking until my grandfather was dying of leukemia. My mom was the one who persuaded my dad to see him before he passed. That type of family is the worst. A number of years ago, my brother and I decided we were going to move out of state more than halfway across the country. It just so happened that we wanted to go to the same state for totally separate reasons, so we'd still be fairly close to each other. Well, my parents hated our home state, so they decided to move with us so they could be close to us. When they left, about 75% of my dad's side of the family suddenly became very vicious towards them, thinking that my dad abandoned them for various reasons. It's still so bad that several of them refer to my mother as Dad's name's wife, despite obviously knowing her name married 20 years, because they blame her for taking him away from the family. If you couldn't tell, many of them are abusive and toxic people who only care about posturing for the rest of the family. I am not sure if he ever told them that they were a large part of why he hated living in our home state, but I know that none of us has to deal with that toxic atmosphere anymore. Props to your parents. It sounds like they really had each other's best interest at heart. It's a great example of what it takes to make a healthy marriage. Teamwork. I was terrified of my father until the day he talked shit about my wife. I fucking unloaded on him. He screamed, and for the first time ever, I screamed back louder. I told that motherfucker he would speak my wife's name with respect, or I would teach it to him. He eventually backed down and apologized, which had never happened before. Never ever let anyone get between you and your partner, especially family. When my shitty father kicked me out of the house, and then demanded he have access to my bank to control my financial situation, and I got to tell him, you have no control over me anymore. You set me free when you kicked me out, and now you can't do shit. Why would even a psycho like that be dumb enough to think you'd let him do that? Habit, probably. My wife and I moved to WA state, and my mill tried to tell me that she was going to call the police because I had pot in the house. Some White House lady sat at my bar and tried to get a drink without ID. She pulled out her White House ID card, which had no daub. I work at the White House. I told her that her bosses would be very proud of me enforcing their laws when I didn't serve her a drink. The federal government is such an enormous employer, especially in the DMV area, where I am guessing this was. I don't understand why people think working for them gets you special treatment. As a federal employee, I can tell you it does not generally garner respect from anyone. I prefer not to tell people. My dad called me after I moved out to inform me that the lawn was getting pretty long and needed to be mowed. So, I asked, "Well, just because you don't live here anymore doesn't mean it's not your responsibility," he said. "Yes it does," I said, and hung up on him. Parents can be idiots at times. My mother suggested that I move into a 2-bedroom place so that when she and my father are in town, they'll have somewhere to stay. I asked her where the hell she thinks the money for possibly double the rent I am currently paying will come from. She thinks it's still the 70s, 80s. New director. Decides admin should hold a meeting at noon MF in the nurses' lunchroom, and bar them from entering during that time. Defines it in a group text as a quick win. My response: please help me to understand how this is beneficial to remove the nurses from their lunchroom during lunch break. No response, his peers and higher-ups in on the text. He is then moved to the quality department. Screwed up in so many levels. At my last job, they decided to hold the quarterly meetings in the break room. So every quarter the break room was off limits the whole week. They also decided to hire a catering company for their meetings. The catering company would install themselves on the kitchen. So we didn't have access to neither the break room or the kitchen. Fuck those guys. Wow, that's some horseshit. Non-profit I worked at had big quarterly board meetings and caterers would take over the kitchen. We were just told to be quiet while getting our food and eat somewhere else. And they always ordered too much food and offered it to the low-level program staff after the board meeting. We weren't invited to the board meeting, but they were nice enough about it. This. Feed me and I won't complain about much of anything. Why even do it in the first place? Was he just in the mood to ruin someone's day? Trying to pull and assert his dominance probably. I already posted one. One more short one. I was about 12 years old, maybe younger. Often had been forced to stay with my mom's friends when she'd go out of town. The father was an abusive prick. He'd do things like make tomatoes every night for dinner knowing I absolutely hated them. For a week. Threw me in a pool when I was small, and he knew I couldn't swim. Classic 70s macho man. He literally tortured me every chance he'd get. As an aside, if you're a kid, and your own mother doesn't give a shit how people treat you, it's pretty much open season. Anyway, we went out to dinner one night. Me, my mom, her friends and their kids. We were leaving the restaurant. I don't remember what preceded it, but he said, "Go ahead, tough guy." Hit me as hard as you can right in the gut, thinking I wouldn't do it because I was scared of him. But this was my moment and I knew it. He was a small man, 5'6". I was at least as tall as him already. And as he gave me his shit-eating grin, I pulled my fist back and fucking belted him in the gut with every ounce of strength I could muster. He immediately doubled over. He was fucking pissed. He tried to turn it around on me, but his wife shut him up instantly. "You told him to do it. If you weren't ready, it's your fault, not his." One of the most satisfying moments of my life. And one of the last times I had to endure Mr. Tough Guy. He probably realized you could lay him out if he kept up his shit. My dad was like that, didn't stop mad dogging my exes until my 6'2", 240 pounds husband came along, and my dad was perfectly respectful to him. Gosh, that's even more reprehensible. Cowardly weak fucking cunt only has the balls to pick on smaller people. 15 years ago, I worked for a company in Germany that was bought by a large US company. One of the first actions was a mandatory HR meeting. They used their US PowerPoint deck and guided us through the rules and regulations, although directed by our local HR team to not do that. Here are some of the highlights. We are not allowed to accept tickets for the Super Bowl. Utterly confusion, 90% of the people had never heard of the Super Bowl. A discussion about why we would want to watch that anyways started. We are not allowed to have relationship with anybody from a supplier or within the company. Uproar in the room. This is against the German constitution. What you do in your free time is none of their business. The discussion gets heated, everybody is discussing. The Americans on the line are very confused why. The head of QA finally gets up and shouts, "If I love that woman, nobody will prevent me from dating her." People signed the sheet that they participated and read and understood the presentation with reservations. People start discussing where to sign up for legal expenses insurance. HR refrained from that day from having mandatory global HR meetings. Management tried a couple of other stuff that will employment against the law. Everybody has a contract, cutting vacation against the law, canceling bank holidays against the law. Make people work on vacation days, guess what, against the law, and a couple more. It was a prime example of cultural ignorance and incredible funny. Edit. Wow, thank you for the awards and votes. Lots of American companies have rules about not dating coworkers, but they don't have any authority to enforce them other than finding other reasons to dismiss you. Edit. Yes, I know about at-will employment. The issue being that in corporate, the person firing doesn't always have the authority to do so without paper trail approval. Also, many businesses have their own rules in place. This sounds a lot like when Walmart tried to expand into Germany. Apparently it was a hellscape for them, rightfully so. It wasn't just employee relations, but the fact German bans price cutting for those of you wondering. When Walmart moved into a new area, it sells everything at a loss just long enough for all their competitors to go out of business, or at least all the small ones. Then they set things back to normal prices. Not only that space was already occupied by Aldi, Lidl and others. And guess who's continuously expanding in the US? That's right. Aldi. One of my jobs is in a hotel, or restaurant, or bar. A guest came into the bar after having been refused service at our sister hotel down the road. He was very drunk and had been rude, abusive and threatening to the staff. He insisted we serve him as he was a guest, but we'd already been phoned by our sister hotel so they could let us know what the situation was. We refused, but offered him some water and suggested he go up to his room. He then went on about how he had nearly bought our hotel, and that he was practically our boss, so we should serve him or he'd have us fired. We refused. He told us he was a very rich man, and would tip us hundreds of pounds if we served him. We refused. He was getting abusive at this point, so we again suggested he have some water and head up to his room. He went on to tell us that his brother was the mayor, so we should serve him. We refused and told him he should go on up to his room yet again. He then said he was going to the pub across the street, but all the pubs or restaurants in our town have a barred from them all policy. We telephoned the other pubs to inform them of the situation. Many of them got back to us and said they had been offered money, been threatened with losing their jobs, and also told the story of the mayor. All of the pubs stuck to their guns and refused to serve him. Eventually, he came back to the hotel and went to his room. Unfortunately, he was the High King of Skyrim. Until he was murdered in cold blood by the usurper. I work at a hotel. It's high-end, so we often take the approach of just appeasing guests no matter what, so I frequently have to bite my tongue. However, we have a very desirable parking lot, and when people poach it we boot them. I love enforcing these, because I don't have to bite my tongue or apologize, as they aren't guests. My favorite one was this. Girl parks and walks to neighbor hotel. Our GM happens to be in the lot, and says, "Hey, just FYI, this is parking for X hotel, not Z hotel." She proceeds to say "fuck you," flips him off, and walks into neighbor hotel. GM calls me and tells me. I giggle, grab the boot and slap it on her car. She comes back screaming and ranting. I tell her the cost is $200. She calls the police. The police ask, "Is this a private lot?" Yes. Okay, then pay them. She refuses to pay and storms off. I get a call requesting the manager. I speak with them, it's the girl's mom. She is trying to say, "Oh, my daughter didn't know, she was for a job interview yada yada." I let her go on, and when she finally stops making excuses, I tell her that her daughter flipped off the GM, and there is no way the boot is coming off without payment. On top of that, I tell her when she pays she better not come in swearing or yelling, or the price goes up to $300. She hangs up, the daughter comes back and silently hands me $200, with a look of rage on her face. I have never been so internally giggly before. Just as an aside, are there any local regulations regarding private booting and price? Can you really just set your own price as you see fit? I mean, could you be like, "It will be $10,000? I think the max is like $350 in our area. I was working a lab assistant shift. I'm a tech receiving specimens and such, when a doctor phoned the lab. He was very upset that there was a test that was taking far too long in his opinion. I said okay, let's look at it, and asked what the test was. A fungal culture. A fungal culture takes at least 2 weeks to see if anything grows. The patient was in the ER. I politely told him the test was a send out, and they generally take about 2 weeks or longer depending on the fungus. He got all huffy and asked why it took so long, and is there a way to speed up the process, since he wants to discharge the patient? I chuckled a little because this is a common problem with cultures. We're literally waiting for stuff to grow, we can't just make them grow faster. I told him we don't have magical wands that make fungus grow really fast. He then asked for a lab tech because I was just a lab assistant. I then let him know I was in fact a lab tech with experience in microbiology, and I can tell him from first-hand experience that fungal cultures are some of the slowest cultures, right up there was AFBs, and assured him that if anything comes of it, we'll let ER know. He didn't really like that but said fine and hung up. How does a doctor not know that? Edit. And yes, I do know what they call the person who graduates last in their class. 25 people must have replied with this comment. You'd be surprised how few doctors know about lab technique and such. Had an old boss who was a complete and total bastard. He was actually my boss, and wasn't supposed to interact with us unless it was through our boss, but he just loved trying to make everyone under him squirm. The company had forced him to go to training twice because of how he spoke to people. One day, I get a call at home from him, and he just starts unloading cursing, name-calling, insulting over some technical issue he just found out about. After a couple of minutes, I just looked at my phone and hung up on him. The next day, I get called into a meeting with his boss, who basically wants to know who the fuck I think I am hanging up on this guy. I calmly explain that no one gets to yell at me on my time, in my home, on my phone. You have to wait for me to be on the clock to pay me for that privilege, and he'll gladly take that money if I am busy being yelled at. I am not busy with anything else. Seemed to work. Edit. Holy hell, the upvotes and awards. Thanks everyone, I am going to tell everyone who still cracks jokes about that asshole about all the Reddit love. This is my next big power move at work. I am working from home, so the next time my boss starts screaming at me I am just going to use my best teacher voice to say, when you can match my tone, I will be happy to have this conversation with you, and then I will hang up the call. I used to get a ton of angry customers at a car dealership service department I worked in. I started using this sentence. I am a person, you're a person, let's talk like people. Simple. But effective. Worked 99% of the time. Edit. Thanks for the awards. First ones. I have used right now. There are two people that care about your issue, and you are yelling at one of them. Works surprisingly well. Brother, you are cool as a ice. I am taking notes and slow clapping it out. I wasn't that cool back then. This was my first big job running a cooling plant, and I was a nervous wreck, chain smoking through every shift and hating whenever this guy would rattle me. I think I was as surprised as he was when I hung up and stood my ground. LOL. You weren't cool. You were cooler. I used to work at a few subways. Thing is, the owner inherited them when she already had a busy and lucrative career elsewhere. She mainly held onto them to employ immigrant family members, I think. One time, she was in the back when she heard me interact with an angry customer. Afterward, she came out and said, "You know you don't have to take shit like that. I trust you, you can use your judgment, and just toss anybody out who talks to you like that." After that I wouldn't take any shit from anybody. Slightest hint of backtalk to your sandwich artist, and you were out on your ass, still hungry. It was so much fun. Let me speak to your manager. No. Get out. I am going to call and complain. Oh, I am terrified. Go nuts, but you can't call from in here, because you're trespassing now. The sheer indignance of an entitled customer when you don't bow and scrape before them is really something to behold. No. Get out. Is absolutely hilarious, and I would pay so much money to get to see that. At least $5. You used to be able to get a sandwich for that. When I tended bar at a local brewery, people would come in asking for some random one-off beer from 4 years ago. No harm in asking, of course, but some people would get pissed like I was hiding it from them. Whenever they got to the point of saying, "I don't believe you," I would say okay and walk away. Like, you're literally just telling me that this conversation doesn't matter, you're not going to listen to anything I say, and you're clearly the kind of asshole who won't tip, so why would I try to make you happy? Same shit at the liquor store I work at. They always think we're hiding it. We want your money, why would we do that, lol. She sounds like a good boss. I actually thought this comment was building up with her as the villain in this one, lol. One of my new employees came from a competitor who is, shall we say, not as put together as we are. Her former boss had actually called me to yell at me about poaching his consultants. Which, in and of itself, is weird enough. However, a few weeks after she started, the dude rolled up to our office. He had apparently been calling her to get her to finish an analysis for him, and she just ghosted him. I went to the lobby to see what the fuck he was doing here. He started in on me again, and then she happened to walk by. I didn't fully understand the conversation, but at one point he literally demanded she do this analysis. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. I did the OL, hand on his back, point to the door, universal symbol for leave, or a large security man will make you leave. Never heard from him again. I have got a similar story. Many years ago, we fired a salesperson. She was a compulsive liar and unethical as hell. She was also living under the delusion that the place would fall apart without her, and that would be begging her to come back in a couple of weeks. So it didn't sit too well with her when we hired her replacement. His first day on the job, she calls him up to cuss him out for stealing her job. Later that day, she called corporate. I understand their conversation went like this. That bastard's trying to steal my clients. He's going around town telling people he replaced me. Corporate. He did replace you. Harass him again or any other employees, and we're calling the cops. That finally convinced her that we weren't going to be begging her to come back. Edit. Typos. She just said, "Or what?" and waited a few beats before turning on her heels and walking away. Brilliant. I had a rough childhood with a drug addict father. My mom struggled to make ends meet, and my first job was paying for the mortgage. After several months of working again at my first job, I finally had some money to spend on myself and decided to get a computer and a decent internet connection. At the time, the best internet I could buy as part of a dish combo package. I bought a dish and brought it home to install on the house. During this time, my dad was still living at home with us, but he was hardly there, and my parents had all but separated at that point. My dad promptly asked me what I was doing putting a dish on his house. I let him know that I pay the mortgage now, and I make the decisions on what we do with the house. I was young, but it was a very empowering moment for me. Edit. I didn't expect to see all this when I checked Reddit again. I'll try to answer questions and things below. I like the jokes, probably a coping mechanism, lol. Edit 2. I see a lot of people talking about the deed, and wanted to say something about that. I am not sure which of my parents' names were on the deed, but what I did know is that if I didn't pay it, it was going to foreclosure. We already had warnings, and it wasn't the first time that had happened. I was young when this all happened and probably didn't even know what a deed or title was at that time. If I stopped paying, we no longer had a house. A constant argument from parents to their kids is that they pay for the roof over your head, so you'll do what they tell you. They rarely say, "I own the deed, you do what I tell you." Guess revenge is a dish best served on the side of the house. So my grandpa was a piece of work. Abusive, alcoholic, criminal, endlessly cheated on my grandma. My dad was the eldest of 7. He started working before and after school at age 8. If my dad didn't hide the money, my grandpa would take and spend it on booze, gambling, and other women. Anyway, when my dad was in high school, he took what learned from shop class and odd jobs and built 2 bedrooms and enlarged the kitchen of their ramshackle house. He was 17 years old and he did it during the hour or two he had between 2 jobs and school. Took him almost a year. The day he was done, my grandpa rolls up with another woman, and the 4 kids they have together and tries to move them in. My spineless grandmother was going to let it happen until my dad said, "I will burn this motherfucker down before I let you move another family in here." That night, my grandpa came back and burned the house down himself. Fortunately, my father had gone and paid an insurance salesman $1 a week to insure the house. This time, they're built with cinder block and a tin roof. Holy shit, that is a crazy story. Grandpa's certifiably nuts. I taught my 6th grade students about democratic processes, and we ran a simulation. Without fail, every one of my classes tried to impeach me. Should have played monarchy instead. As long as you don't have a guillotine in your class. Did your parents sign the permission slip for the execution? The paper cutter in the back of the room is pretty much a guillotine. Nice try, but my classroom is actually a benevolent dictatorship. Was a benevolent dictatorship that'll teach them to try to impeach. Class simulations always make politics fascinating, lol. When I was in grade 8 we were learning about the Russian Revolution, and our teacher did a thing where one student could beat Tsar for the day. They got to sit at the front of the classroom in the teacher's chair, and hold a Sailor Moon scepter that lit up, plus they got one special privilege to exercise during that period. Usually it was that another student would take notes for them or they could skip a small segment, but one of the popular goofy kids decided he wanted to go out in the hallway, and have his friends take a running start and fling him as fast as they could down the hall in the teacher's rolling chair. Teacher allowed it, nobody was hurt, but for some reason we weren't allowed to do Tsar for the day anymore. The point is, that was an awesome idea to make a boring unit more engaging. 15 years later, I still remember a lot about that class and Russian history because of how fun that class was. Had a psychology class, and as a small 10-minute example the teacher labeled half of the room the Windows team, because they sat near the window, and half of us the door team because, you guessed it, we sat near the door. 15 years later I still see a guy from that class like once every 3 years in passing, and we always exchange fucking windows, yeah we'll fuck you doors. I work in an NHS hospital. No one pays anything out of pocket for treatment here, it's all paid for through taxation. A patient was added onto our clinic, who had paid one of our doctors for surgery privately at another hospital, but she was getting her follow-ups free on the NHS. Technically this shouldn't happen, but it does. These patients can be a bit difficult. This lady's appointment was at 8:55 before we even started at 9:00. She had her workup done when we actually clocked in, and was all snooty about waiting 5 whole minutes, bearing in mind she's saving a fortune. Then one of the nurses from the ward called, and an actual NHS patient needed seen urgently, so they were brought up and seen ahead of the private patient. Well, this woman went mental, started shouting and bawling that she'd paid all this money, and she demanded service. Our charge nurse went out, demanded to know who had taken money off of her, really drilled the patient to point to the person who had dared take money off of an NHS patient. Well, the woman went beetroot, stuttered that she had paid the other hospital, and the charge was like, exactly, your money is no good here, and doctor is being paid by the taxpayer to see this emergency patient first, so kindly sit down and be quiet or leave my department until you can be civil. Sort of a you have no power here moment. But funny nonetheless. My dad and I went to Lowe's one time, and the guy helping us had on a veteran hat, and a few pins kept trying to insinuate we didn't know what we were talking about, and that we didn't need what we were there for, and kept trying to argue about everything. So my dad asked what service he was in trying to break ice, and the dude said he was in Team 6 1970 to 1974 in Vietnam, and trained in Great Lakes. Which was the wrong answer, so my dad asked if he meant SEAL Team 1 or 2. The man, recognizing my dad's service ring, immediately buffed up on my dad, and got tomato-faced red, and tried to assert dominance as a superior. So my dad immediately called the guy on his shit for stolen valor, explained why he was full of shit, and threatened to turn him in for it, and get his management involved. I haven't seen that guy in town in a while. Nice one. I am guessing there was no SEAL Team 6 in the 70s. SEAL Team 6 wasn't founded until 1980. Years after the conflict in Vietnam ended. SEAL Teams 1 and 2 were in Vietnam almost throughout the entire conflict. They were among a very, very select few of people chosen to go through that program, and they weren't trained in Great Lakes either. Among other notable SEALs was Richard Dick Marcinko. My dad is extremely knowledgeable on military history, and was super quick to shut this douchebag down. I don't understand why people do that. And not the stolen valor thing. I feel like that's connected to some sort of mental illness or deficiency, but the people who don't research the valor they're stealing. Sure, some rando might not know or realize, but that moment when you get a guy like Ops Dad can completely wreck your life if you don't do simple research. Just boggles me. If you're going to do something already questionable, at least keep your lies consistent. But I suppose someone willing to do something as foolish, cringy, and unethical as stealing valor probably doesn't have the mental acuity to keep their story straight. I worked at a Walmart as a cashier, and the assistant manager there was a dick. He would insult everybody working there and forced us sometimes to do work above our pay grade. 6 months later, me and him got transferred to another Walmart that was just built, and they needed to pick a manager, an assistant manager. Some random got manager, but I got assistant manager. I guess all the complaints on the assistant manager basically gave him a demotion. So one day he was ordering the other cashiers around, then I pulled him to the side and told him that if he kept pulling the same shit around he would be out of here. I haven't heard anything from him since. That surely must have been one of those moments where you're like, I'm so going to enjoy this. Not sure if this exactly fits, but my son worked at Walmart, and they had a manager ordering the workers to do unsafe stuff that was against policy, and my son told him he wasn't going to do it. The MGR said, "You have to, cause I am the manager." My son said, "Dude, that's like being the mayor of a trailer park, no one cares." MGR shut up and walked away. My mother made my childhood hell unpredictable moods. Every second weekend would be family drama weekend with day-long tirades about how everyone hates her, and we are horrible to her, and surely we are so vile, and want her to leave. Yelling and abuse got so bad I got panic attacks and nothing was done about it. Random beating, crying, insults, very controlling. Went through my letters and diary. Called me a whore or dumb as a cow when I came home 15 minutes too late, the works. After what seemed like ages of struggling, I finally managed to move out at age 21, to an address within the same city. Her whining continued. Why would I not give her keys to my apartment? Why did I not phone in every day? Where was I? Who was I with? What was I doing at every time of the day? I must hate her. I must be looking forward to dancing on her grave. I tried to not react and give her more ammunition, but when she ended up asking at some point, "Why are you not coming by and visiting us every day?" I finally replied, "Because I don't live here anymore," and thank God it shut her up. Edit. Ironing out some typos, formatting. Also, whoa, thanks for all these likes, you guys. She sounds like she has serious mental issues. Pretty much every time my in-laws come over. For over 20 years they have attempted to dictate how I should live my life, raise my kids, dress, cook, etc. I always just nod and say, "I'll consider that," but not in a genuine way, in a condescending fuck you way. When they press it, I simply say, "You may leave my house now." Oh, I have a good one. I was responding to a call with our volunteer fire department a couple years ago. I was west of town, and a vehicle rolled halfway between where I was and the fire hall. So I called the responding people and said, "I'll meet you there." It was a single vehicle that rolled, and they were all immigrants from the Pakistan or Afghanistan region. Before I got there, a doctor from the same region had stopped to lend a hand. She was from the similar region as those involved in the crash, and I had assumed she was the 8th person in the van. She started to try to order me around and tell me I only needed to know certain information about the patient she was with. It went something like this. Dr. She has midline neck pain and sore ribs. Me. Okay, and crepitus or deformity to the. Dr. That's all you need to know. Me. Ahwa. Dr. I am a doctor and that's all you need to know. That's when I figured maybe I should ask what kind of doctor, in case this is some wackadoo who just claims to be a doctor like we've had happen before. She tells me she's a podiatrist. I gave her my best look of trying to be nice, but their feet are fine right now. When doctors or nurses show up on scene, they ultimately can trump EMS. But they have to actually do the work and sign off as having taken patient control. As soon as I asked her to sign the paperwork and ride with us to the hospital, she realized she was out of her knowledge area and disappeared. The only excuse for a doctor to be rude like that and say someone doesn't need to know more is if they don't know they're talking to EMS, and just think you're being nosy asking questions. Not sure if it fits, but during an insanely busy weekend before Christmas, a Karen was complaining to every associate about how messy our store was. The manager had relieved the girl at the fitting room, and was helping to hang stuff. Karen pulled her crap, and was trying to make a point that we were messy and a horrible place to shop. This manager told her roughly, "Ma'am, we're messy at the moment because we're a popular store. And the biggest reason we're messy is because of women like you who can't be bothered to pick up after themselves. It's not the associates making the mess. It's people like you. Your type have us outnumbered." First time I actually witnessed someone deflate. Love this one. I always rehang my clothes before leaving a dressing room. My parents were yelling at me, and then my grandpa walks over and tells them both to sit the fuck down. They both shut the fuck up and sit their ass down on the couch. It was by far the most powerful thing I have ever seen him do. LMAO. Why were they yelling though? Honestly, I kind of forgot. We were in India cause that's where my grandparents live, and being a kid I prob did something dumb. Nobody messes with the grandparents. Also, grandmas make the best food ever. Change my mind. They have generations of "I brought you into this world, I can take you out of it" power. So my uncle is a deputy sheriff, and one time he was at an airport talking to my aunt over the phone in Spanish. Once he got done with his call, some nearby Karen that overheard him went up to him and started demanding to see his green card. Uncle has an accent too, so you can tell he's wasn't born in the US. Uncle decides to fuck with her and tells her he doesn't know what a green card is and has never heard of one. She gets more pissed and keeps demanding to see it. He messes with her some more, then eventually he goes, "Well, I don't got a green card, but I got this," then takes out his wallet and shows her his badge. She immediately walked away while my uncle laughed his ass off. Why do these people think they have any kind of authority to get someone to show their ID? It blows my mind. My parents came to visit, and my mother, who is very old-fashioned, the woman should be a homemaker, and if not she shouldn't out-earn the man kind of old-fashioned. Told my wife, who makes stacks as a dev team manager compared to my peanuts as a sports writer. "You know, dear, you really should try to keep a cleaner house." And without looking up from her making lunch, my wife said, "Yeah, your son forgot to clean this week, before you guys flew in." The stunned look on my mom's face was priceless. Girl came into my apartment to hang out with my roommate. Demanded that I turn off the football game I was watching so we could focus on her. I literally said to her, "Who the hell do you think you are?" and kept watching the game. She yelled at me and stormed out. Thankfully, me and my roommate never saw her again. Reminds me of when I went to a music festival. I brought a camping chair because I get terrible backache after a few days of sleeping in a tent and sitting without back support. I don't mind others using the chair when I am not around though. So I returned to my tent for a meal, and a guy friend of a friend sat in my chair. So I asked him if I could get it back. He said nobody is sitting on that coal box over there. So I said great, so you have somewhere else to sit then. He kept arguing that it would do me no harm to sit somewhere else for a while, and that he deserved to enjoy my comfy chair for a while as well. So I said dude, I went to the store to buy a chair, strapped the chair to my backpack and hauled it all the way over here, while you were too lazy to do so, and now you believe you are entitled to make use of my stuff. You can get out of my chair right this moment please, and you're lucky I'll allow you to sit on my coal box. All he said to me, while looking in complete disbelief, was are you really serious about this? Like I was the asshole. I said yes, and when he didn't get any support of the rest of the group, he finally got up and moved to the coal box. The entitlement of some people. I have one that crosses with I don't work here lady a bit. I have a job, but I will still do interviews every couple years. This means the script is flipped a bit. They have to convince me to work there. Anyway, I got the town early, so I stopped at a bakery to get something to eat. The woman went in the back to get it, and this squat toad of a woman walks in, yells at me to get her order, and then yells at me again for not getting up right away to serve her. When I point out that I do not in fact work there, she goes off me about how important she is, etc. We can skip the play-by-play. I go the interview. Head of IT, and the toad woman walks in. She has this evil grin on her face. I stop everything. I point at the toad woman, and I say something like I have seen how your management treats people, and I have no interest in working for you, and I take my resume out his hands and walk out. The look on her face was priceless. Oh, and he had walked in with a print of a resume, so I took his copy. Felt great to do. Edit. And gold. Thanks kind stranger. Edit 2. Reward overload. Thank you all so much. I have seen how your management treats people, and I have no interest in working for you. I once concluded an interview with a similar, if this is how you talk to potential employees, I can't imagine how you treat people you actually have power over. Go piss up a rope and hung up. That lady sucked. This is a life-changing idea. How did I never think of this? Do it. See what you are worth at the very least. But it is loads of fun to stop them and say I already have a job, convince me I want to work here, and watch them stammer. I was going for a supervisor job once and I did that. They couldn't believe someone would say that at an interview. They offered me the manager job one step up from where I was applying about 2 days later. Sadly, the place got bought out and closed within a year. But still, I do this too. I go in to interview them. It's great and takes a ton of pressure off of me. Plus you can honestly tell them how much you'd have to get paid to want to work there or decide if you don't want to work there at all. It's really nice to be able to answer the question, why do you want to work here? With I don't know if I do yet. I was hoping you'd show me today why it would be a good move for me flipped. A co-worker friend of mine was flying back from a sales conference in Vegas, and he was able to upgrade to a first-class seat. We had this bitch sales VP that was on the same flight. She was the snobby, entitled type with a full-time nanny and giant McMansion in the suburbs, and she generally treated people who worked for her like servants. She sees him in a first-class seat, as she is making her way to coach, and asks him how he got that seat. He used points to upgrade. As people are getting settled in, she makes her way back up to the first-class cabin, and asks to speak with the lead flight attendant. She tells him that one of her underlings is sitting in first class, and that she needs to switch with him since she's higher on the corporate ladder. The guy can't believe what he's hearing, but she won't take no for an answer. Finally, he tells her she has to go back to her seat, or she will be escorted from the plane. She made a complete ass of herself in front of the whole first-class cabin. This one just makes me sad. People who really internalize that a corporate ladder has any relation to people's worth are only hurting themselves in the end. Wait until you meet military wives. I knew a military wife. She expected people to thank her for her service. And to think that is someone's boss rip. WTF. I love all the people in the world who like to argue this shit doesn't happen, because it does and people can be terrible. I am convinced the people who claim non-stop on Reddit that a scenario never happened, and would never happen, have never worked a service industry job, or with the public. I believe some of the most outlandish stories, because I have seen a thing or two that I wouldn't believe could be real until I worked the job myself. In my first apartment, my parents came to visit and I said fuck. When I hit my head on the open door of the freezer while standing up from grabbing something from the fridge. My mother said, "You can't talk like that in my home," and stopped mid-sentence. My normally very sweet, supportive mother was a terror to drive with when I was on my learner's permit. She'd scream, shout, brace herself against the dash. It got to a point where I would jump anytime she made any sudden movements while I was driving because I thought she was going to scream at me. In my early 20s I got the first car that I bought myself, paid insurance on, and the like. I was driving through a construction zone, and she tried her usual thing. When I told her to knock it off, she said, "I can do what I want basically." I said, "Not in my car. I am done with you acting this way. If you don't knock it off, I am going to drop you off at the next rest stop and Dad can pick you up." My dad was following us in my parents' car, so I wasn't ditching her. She'd just be transferring cars. After that, it all stopped. She may be doing it in her head, but she doesn't do it on the outside anymore. The fuck of it all is, now that I am a pretty experienced driver, I can tell you she is one of the worst drivers I have ever ridden with. And honestly, acting that dramatically around an inexperienced driver is going to make the ride less safe, not more. My late mum went one better. She was staying at ours and I dropped a plate and said fuck. "Oops, sorry mum. It's your house, lad, but do you mind if I do?" "No, be my guest." "Have I told you my new neighbors are cunts? I miss her." Sounds like your mother was a lovely lady. Keep these memories, and may she rest in peace. She sounds like an awesome lady. Sorry you've lost her. Sounds like he's kept her, and now shared her with us. Bless. I was cooking Thanksgiving dinner at my house for my husband, kids, and my parents. Midway through I burned myself on some hot oil that splashed up and got my arm. I loudly yelled fuck. My mom started to scold me for swearing around her kids, and I very quickly shot that one down. She deflated like a balloon and sulked in the living room until it was mealtime. Getting splashed with hot oil while cooking is pretty much free license to say what you want anyway. At least she had the decency to realize what she was doing, unlike the other replies in this thread. Wow. You are still with us. Thanks for being such a nice person. As long as you are here, why not like this video and subscribe to our channel? Also you can press the bell icon, so you won't miss any future uploads.